Well, Billy and I are going to tell you a story today. What's the story about, Billy?
Well, Ethan's story is...
The story. Well, he's a bit reluctant, so I will just have to bat on. So, Billy's favourite story, of many of the stories that I have to tell to get him to sleep, is about Mr Cuttle. So the Cuttle story took place over 60 years ago. So is anyone 9 years old here? 8, 9? Okay. You're 9? Okay. Well, I was 9, and when I was 9, this is how much I got for pocket money. Can you tell me how much that is? 5 cents. Okay. Didn't look like a lot, and I guess if you paid your kids 5 cents today, you'd probably be in prison for 2 years. But I used to have to do a lot of work to get that 5 cents. I had to do all the dishes, I had to get the wood in, I had to do lots of things. But what it allowed me to do every Friday was to go down to a corner store, a big farming store, because we lived in a little farming town right out in the country. And this store had 2 enormous wooden doors, and they didn't quite meet, and you could just see a gap. And my favourite thing was I'd go down there, I'd just have a look through the gap to see who was on the counter, and if it was one of my favourites, I'd go in there and I'd pay my 5 cents, and I would get a bag of Macintosh lollies. Hold that up, Billy. It's about that size. Now, don't open it. So, now Macintosh lollies, you can't get them now, but you can get them in New Zealand. What I used to pay 5 cents for now costs $35. And my favourite thing on a Friday night was lying in bed, hearing the rain coming down on the tin roof, and reaching under and picking out a toffee and wondering whether you were going to get either a mint, an egg and cream, a Harrogate, a malt, or a toffee deluxe. I just thought heaven couldn't be any better. But there was one person that I always wanted to avoid going in there, and that was Mr Cuttle, because Mr Cuttle was the father of the school bully. And my father was a teacher at the school where Ivan Cuttle was the school bully. And my father had to line up Ivan and discipline him. And I think that's probably why Mr Cuttle didn't like me, because whenever I went in, instead of getting lollies that big, I used to get lollies half that size. So I avoided him like the plague. Anyway, on this particular day, I went in and I couldn't see anyone at the counter. And when I went up to the counter, unfortunately, Mr Cuttle suddenly appeared. And he said to me, "What do you want, Tipple?" And I put my 5 cents down and I looked him in the eye and I said, "I want the usual, Cuttle." And he said, "You rude young man, out you go. You are not going to get served today." And so I had to go home without my Macintosh lollies. And unfortunately, I told my big brother John what had happened. And he, of course, did what all big brothers seem to do, and he went and told Dad. So Dad called me in and he asked me to explain why I hadn't got my Macintosh lollies and what had happened. And I sort of anticipated this was happening, so I had a pretty good defence already prepared. And I explained to Dad that it was all his fault because Mr Cuttle didn't like me, because Dad had to discipline Ivan, the school bully, and because of that, Mr Cuttle was exceptionally rude to me, and I just spoke back to him in exactly the same way that he spoke to me. And I think that was fair enough, but Dad didn't see it that way. And he said, "Stuart," he said, "someone's rudeness to you is not an excuse for you to be rude." He said, "On Monday morning, you've got to go back to the store and you have to apologise to Mr Cuttle." Can you imagine what a terrible weekend it was? No Macintosh lollies on a Friday night, and worrying all weekend about having to go back and apologise to Mr Cuttle. And Dad said I had to do it before school started. So down I went and I looked for Mr Cuttle and I couldn't see him, and I finally found him out the back, and he was talking to another man, and when he saw me he just turned his back. He was again really rude to me, and I was just standing very, very patiently, and suddenly I realised I needed to be at school. So I just said, excuse me, Mr Cuttle, I've just come to apologise. I'm very sorry for being rude to you on Friday. And I can't tell you the surprise he got on his face, but I took off, went to school, reported to Dad, the deed was done, and that was it. But I was terrified about next Friday. What was I going to do? So I approached the store, I looked through that gap in the doors, and there was no Mr Cuttle, and I thought, okay, now or never, and in I went. And guess what? Mr Cuttle appeared out of nowhere. Stuart, he said, what can I do for you today? The usual, I presume? I said, yes, Mr Cuttle, yes, sir. Well, instead of getting the small bag, instead of getting the usual bag, I got, I'd say, $70 worth. And my whole relationship with Mr Cuttle was changed forever. Whenever I looked through those doors, I was looking for Mr Cuttle, because our whole relationship had changed, because I took the advice of my father. Even though he was rude to me, I knew that I shouldn't have been rude to him. And sometimes you get advice from your parents that you should take, and if you do take it, I hope that you end up with a good result like I did.
Can we have a lolly?
If you'd helped with the story, you could have.